Couple of weeks ago, I did a video on quieting your crossbow. Remember, I don't think we can use the term silencing your crossbow. I think that's a bit of a stretch, but quieting your crossbow certainly is possible. It certainly is something that can be done. Did a video on that, tested it with a decibel meter with Genevieve's help, and we came up with conclusions about how much all of this gear added to the front of Bungie made in terms of a difference in volume. Perceived loudness, I guess is the term, but that is something that we published that in a previous video about quieting your crossbow. Check that out if you haven't seen it already. The big takeaway from that is you're not really going to make your crossbow so quiet that deer aren't going to hear it. That's my opinion. That's my conclusion that I've drawn from all of that. You aren't going to make your crossbow so quiet that people confuse it with a compound bow either. That's not going to happen. We just aren't going to get them to be that quiet. At least that is the case with this recurve crossbow. And the effect of sound dampening systems is going to vary from crossbow to crossbow. There's no question about that. I'm just giving you sort of a general idea in terms of how it worked with this older, clunkier, louder model of sorts. With all that in mind, the big question that people took away from that also is, what does all this stuff do to the speed of the crossbow? Now, I was starting out already at 305 feet per second at the maximum. That's the advertised speed of the Excalibur Axiom from back in 2010. Bungie is a 2010 Excalibur Axiom. Shoots 305 feet per second. I always like to say it shoots 305 feet per second on a good day downhill with the wind at your back. You know, it's basically 305 is about the most you're going to squeeze out of this 100 grain broadhead and the brace height all the way forward. I think in all the chronograph tests I did in another video, I hit 305 one time out of all the shots that I took with a 100 grain broadhead. So that gives you an idea about the speed. We're really going, once I got the brace height in the back where I like it, we're really around 298, I think 298 feet per second was the average. The average with the brace height all the way forward was 302 feet per second. So you're basically gonna hit, you know, around, we're hovering around 300 feet per second with this stock model on this crossbow. The question is, with all the sound deadening stuff on here, you've got stuff on the limbs, okay? We have these limb saver type of attachments on the limbs. The RABS system installed here properly this time. I'm doing another video about that, hopefully this week. We have the string stars attached to the strings. We've got the X-Shocks system installed on the corners here, in the corners of the limbs. I'm missing one over here, which I'll get to in another video this week, hopefully. I have dissipator pads here, but sort of an air brake type system for the Axiom models. But I also have the S5 system in the front here installed on it as well. All that stuff installed is going to slow down your crossbow. You're restricting the limbs a little bit. You're adding weight to the limbs, adding weight to the string. And that is the kind of thing I know it's going to have an effect on speed. Now, it's been raining here in northeastern Pennsylvania. We've had rain left and right. I haven't had really a good day where I was off from work, but also at a time when I could go out in the yard and shoot this thing. So finally I set up in the porch because I'm tired of waiting. So I set up under the porch, shot it a couple of times out of the rain. Now, remember before, we were shooting at approximately 300 feet per second. I think before, with the brace height where I keep it now, consistent with where it is now, greater brace height, back almost to the back line, okay? Almost to the maximum brace height that the manufacturer would recommend for this crossbow. The average was around 299 feet per second. Now, when I went out there, when I set up under the porch, when I set it up with a chronograph, are you ready? Drum roll. The new speeds were 282, 281, and 280 feet per second. 3 shots. Now, why did I only take 3 shots? 3 shots I think is enough to give us a good average, but in reality, I went from 282, 281 to 280. I figured I'd stop because it kept going down by 1 every time I shot it, and I figured if I shot it too many times, I'd probably get down to 0. Now, another important thing to point out, that's the speed of this crossbow now, right off the end of the crossbow, an arrow's length from the crossbow. You want to keep an arrow's length or so, a little bit greater than that, between the end of the crossbow and the chronograph. So I'm shooting through something. That's the speed right off the end of the rail. Out at 20 yards, it slows down significantly. You might lose 10 feet per second or so at that speed. You're losing power and speed every 10 yards, every yard. The farther you go, it just keeps going down, down, down. So we're starting off pretty low to begin with. Big question here is, now I've gone from 300 or so down to 280 or so, so I've lost 20 feet per second about with this crossbow. I want to stress that if you installed this stuff on your crossbow, it might make a difference. It might not make a 20 feet per second difference, however. If you're shooting at 350 feet per second and you install all this stuff, it might drop you down to 340 feet per second. I don't know the answer to that. Every crossbow, I think every model is probably going to handle these items a little bit differently. The other thing I want to stress is that if you buy a crossbow with all this stuff installed, and the manufacturer says it's shooting around 355 feet per second, for example, like if you were to look at the Assassin from Excalibur, I think that's 355 feet per second. That stuff's already installed, so with it on there, it still should be shooting around 355 feet per second. I would expect that. I would expect close to that. However, if you bought the 355 Micro from Excalibur, and I'm not sponsored by Excalibur. I'm not suggesting you should use an Excalibur, nothing like that at all. I'm not suggesting that. I just happen to like these products. Or this is the only one I've had, and I happen to like it, but I do look at their newer models too. If you look at that 355 Micro, that shoots 355 feet per second. If you add all this stuff to it, it might be dropping that. You might be shooting at 335, 340, somewhere in there. I don't know. So take that with a grain of salt. It will affect different models differently. Now, I can still sight bungee in with the existing scope and still get it dead on 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 yards with this scope because it has a speed ring, has a variable speed ring, and I can draw that down. It used to be set at around 300. Now I'm going to have it set at just over 275, somewhere around 280 is what I'm going to be shooting for. If I do that, I should be able to dial bungee in accurately, so I shouldn't have any trouble with that. However, I had gone to Excalibur and purchased a new scope, hoping to get some low light performance, improve the low light performance with a new scope, the Twilight DLX. This is a scope that has a bigger tube. It's like 32 millimeters instead of 30 millimeters. And I was looking at that and hoping to use this new scope. Now, I don't think that putting this scope on here with the sound deadening equipment is going to be a good idea. That's not going to work. This scope will no longer perform for me on this crossbow, which is fine. This crossbow will work just fine with this existing scope. But I might send this back. I might save it and buy a different crossbow and put this on it. I don't know. We'll play that by ear. But that is one thing you want to take into account. If you're slowing your crossbow down 20 feet per second, it's going to change accuracy. And got to make sure that you have a scope that can compensate for that. And the last thing, I guess, here's the big question. And I want to know your thoughts on this. If you're shooting at 300 feet per second, you add all this stuff, now you're down to 280. Is it worth it with the marginal value, the marginal improvement that we got in sound quality? And in the other video, I talked about that. This is a much more pleasant thing to shoot now with this stuff installed. It does reduce the vibration a lot. It's a lot more fun to shoot. On the other hand, if it's slowing it down 20 feet per second, do we keep it on here? What do you think? Is it worth slowing down your crossbow? Is 280 feet per second going to get the job done? Or do we take it all off, go back to the other one? I know most of you are probably going to say you need to buy a new crossbow. I know most of you are going to give me that answer, and that's totally okay. I understand where you're coming from with that too. So my initial thoughts are leave this stuff intact, leave it in place, take it to Maryland, start out the early crossbow season with this stuff installed, and just see how it goes. That's the plan. That's what I'm probably going to do, but I'm anxious to hear your thoughts on that as well. Thank you very much for watching this video. I hope you got something out of this. I hope your Crossbow Appreciation Month here in August is going very well and you're getting ready for the upcoming crossbow seasons. And until next time, all hail Bungee!